Hello, my name's Peter and I'm 37 years old. This is the story of my marriage, or at least what used to be my marriage. I was with a beautiful woman named Isabel. She was 2 years younger than me and had the prettiest smile. Unfortunately, her beauty couldn't conceal the betrayal. She put me through. Our marriage lasted 3 years, but it's shocking to think back on the crazy events of the last couple of weeks. It changed everything forever. I first met Isabel at a mutual friend's house party. I'd graduated from law school that year and had just passed the bar. I'd joined a mid-sized law firm, but the workload was overwhelming. I worked odd hours as corporate lawyers generally do, but it wouldn't get truly exhausting until much later. While I was quick to network on the job, I was a quiet person socially. Outside the firm, I remained research-driven but introverted. But as my schedule freed up for a night, I attended a house party where I first met the love of my life, or so I thought. I hardly knew anyone there. My law school buddy, Josh, insisted I come to the party as a friend of his was hosting it. Unfortunately, Josh's friend dragged him away the minute we walked in, and I sat quietly in a corner. This is when I first laid eyes on Isabel. She was a beautiful woman and was mingling with a small crowd in the corner of the room. I was nervous to approach her, but finally mustered the courage. It started with small talk, but as we spoke further, I felt a connection with Isabel. She was witty, charming, and kind. She was in between jobs and still figuring out her passion. We shifted to an isolated area within the house and spoke for hours into the night. It finally felt as though I'd found someone I deeply connected to. Of course, one house party conversation was too premature to say anything. As we parted ways after the party, Isabel and I exchanged numbers, and she asked me to stay in touch. I wasn't sure if it would lead to anything, but I missed talking to her and called her the next day itself. To my surprise, Isabel confessed that she'd been waiting for the call and we decided to meet for a date. She lived about an hour away from me and stayed with her parents. Isabel's family was extremely wealthy, and I won't lie that I felt very intimidated at first. My parents had provided me with a generous childhood, but Isabel seemed accustomed to an entirely different and rather extravagant way of life. Over time, one date led to another, and Isabel and I began meeting each other frequently. One of my fondest memories was stepping out of my law firm after a tiring day at work and seeing Isabel waiting outside for me. It warmed my heart, and I gradually started to believe I'd found the one. However, nothing could have ever prepared me for the future. As Isabel and I continued our frequent dates for a couple of months, our mutual attraction became clear, and one evening I finally asked her out. She was overjoyed and instantly said yes. After that, it was nothing short of bliss for 2 years. Isabel and I introduced each other to our parents, took trips together, and spent all our time with each other. It felt as though I'd known her forever, and I couldn't wait to spend the rest of my life with Isabel. However, the cracks in our relationship emerged shortly. Isabel and I decided to tie the knot 2.5 years later. I was well settled because of my law career, and Isabel's parents gladly approved of our union as well. We had a beautiful ceremony with close family and friends in attendance, and I genuinely never felt happier. Little did I know it would all come crashing down. Isabel and I moved into a lavish apartment I'd bought a few weeks before our marriage. It was closer to my law firm, and it also had plenty of room for Isabel. She'd grown up around luxury, and while I couldn't afford the same, I wanted to ensure she never had a reason to complain. I knew marriage was no cakewalk, but a tragedy soon fell upon us only 5 months later. I was finishing up a few contracts in my office one day when I received a call from Isabel. "Hey honey, I'm just caught up in some work. Anything urgent?" Exasperated Peter, "Something's happened. You need to come home right now." "Isabel, what's the matter? Is everything okay?" "I received the news a few minutes back. There was a car crash. Mom and Dad passed away this morning." I was stunned and in disbelief. I'd only met Isabel's parents 2 days ago for dinner. Even with their immense wealth, they were endlessly kind and generous individuals. The news left me shattered. I rushed home immediately to console Isabel, who was weeping and devastated. We visited the hospital together and met with her relatives. Despite immense pressure from work, I took 2 weeks off from the firm to support Isabel and attend the funeral. The firm rarely allowed me room to breathe, but it was important not just to attend the funeral but to be there for Isabel during such a tragic chapter in her life. However, the funeral had a shocking revelation in store for me. It would not come to fruition until later on, but it was the seed for all things to come. Isabel and her cousins were pretty close, and they'd organized the funeral exceptionally well. It was a beautiful service as everyone arrived in large numbers to pay their respects. Isabel delivered a moving eulogy too, and I remember how emotional I was at that moment. Unfortunately, I was oblivious to her true intentions. As the service came to a close, I interacted with a few of Isabel's relatives. However, when I met her cousin, Theo, I received startling news. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Theo. It's a sad day for all of us. Where's Isabel?" "She's talking to her aunt right now. Honestly, she's been a wreck, but it can't be easy to lose parents whom you love so dearly." "Love? Isabel? Who got that idea into your head?" "What do you mean?" "I thought she'd told you. I don't want to get my CS in any trouble, but Isabel didn't love her parents all that much. Heck, she mentioned to someone 2 years ago that she wished her parents were gone, so all the money would come her way." I was dumbfounded by Theo's revelation. Suddenly it felt as though I hardly knew Isabel at all. I wasn't entirely sure whether to take Theo at face value, given that I barely knew him, but the fact that he practically grew up with Isabel rang warning bells for me. As Isabel and I drove back home after the service, my mind was only occupied with this unexpected news. My mind wrestled with the sudden suspicion. Was there more to Isabel than what met the eye? I felt trapped by the dilemma of whether I should believe my own wife or the words of a cousin she'd known all her life. Isabel noticed I was quiet on the way back home, but I didn't reveal anything. The last thing I wanted to ask my wife was whether she loved her own parents on the day of their funeral. The very idea of it seemed ridiculous, and I decided to drop the subject. I figured I might be unaware of any history between Theo and Isabel, and I shouldn't instantly take his side. But in hindsight, sometimes the most shocking truths are as plain as day all along. As part of her late parents' will, Isabel received a significant amount of their wealth and became the sole proprietor of their family estate. However, she insisted that she was never interested in wealth and she dearly missed her parents. As a few weeks passed by, Isabel started returning to normalcy. She was joyous and full of life again. Given how close she'd been to her parents, I was afraid Isabel would be inconsolable after their loss. To my surprise, she became even livelier. Part of my mind wandered to Theo's words from the funeral, but I didn't think much of it. At the time, I convinced myself that whatever Isabel said was most likely the truth. But the real cracks began showing soon enough. I returned to the firm again, but the workload was even more taxing this time. It became increasingly difficult to make time for Isabel and my responsibilities at home. I was torn between work and family, and there came a time when a few months later, Isabel would spend her evenings at her family estate with her friends and I'd return home to our empty apartment. It felt rather depressing, but I didn't expect her to sit around waiting for me all day. I was aware of how extremely busy I was, and I saw it fair for Isabel to spend time with her friends. But as the months went by, an unmistakable distance grew between the two of us. About a year and a half later, I realized I was neglecting my wife in favor of work and I felt awful about it. And in a rather impulsive move, I resigned from the firm and chose to spend time with Isabel. It was a difficult decision, but I had plenty in savings and didn't want to end up a workaholic who abandoned his family. I arrived home earlier than expected, after my last day at the firm, and waited for Isabel. I was eager to break the news to her. She came home much later and unfortunately she didn't seem to take the news well. "Honey, I've decided to take a break from the firm. I want to be there for you." "What do you mean be there for me? When did you decide this, Peter?" "It was a recent decision. I wanted to spend more time with you and not be buried in my work." "You should have told me about this sooner, Peter. How could you do this? How could you be so selfish?" "Fine, I'm sorry. I should have informed you. I just thought we could spend time again like we used to, Isabel." Isabel nodded her head, but there was some clear disappointment. I was upset, but realized I should have informed her sooner rather than drop a bombshell. I expected at least some enthusiasm, but it was my own fault for not telling Isabel at all about such a big decision. Regardless, I was prepared to be there for her throughout. As Isabel and I started spending time at home, she confessed to me that she felt extremely bored. She wanted to pursue painting after the success of one of her friend's art gallery openings. I was a tiny bit skeptical about the idea as Isabel had never painted before, nor had she expressed any passion about it, but I was nobody to stand in the way of what she wished to pursue. I hired a very expensive art tutor for her and purchased expensive supplies and canvases too. All of it came from my pocket, but I never minded it in the slightest. She was my wife and had every right to ask whatever she wanted. It was a pinch all right, but if it made Isabel happy, I gladly went along with it. I even constructed an art room in the house, as per her request. Weeks flew by as Isabel learned under her tutor, and one evening, I walked into the art room to see her painting on a canvas. I was no art critic, but Isabel's works were less than impressive, to put it politely. They felt like the erratic works of a high schooler as opposed to a talented painter. I was a bit concerned that her tutor seemed to have no effect on her skills, but since Isabel limited painting to a hobby, it was just fine by me. It was only after Isabel's professional insistence that things started to get uncomfortable. 3 months later, Isabel's tutor resigned, stating that she refused to listen to him, forgot everything he taught her, and that she played by her own rules. I was upset by the news and tried very hard to convince him to stay, but he wouldn't listen. Isabel didn't seem bothered by the tutor's resignation, citing that he didn't recognize her true talent. Things became tricky, however, when Isabel woke me up one night with sudden news. "Oh, my friend Charlotte is having another gallery exhibition for her artwork. I want one too." "But honey, Charlotte is a professional painter. You have other skills, painting is just a hobby, isn't it? Just something to enjoy?" Unfortunately, my words fanned a terrible flame. Isabel was furious and grew resentful of me for an entire week until I entertained her gallery demands. I was clueless as to how her art could be accepted to a gallery and hosted in an extravagant exhibition. But she refused to speak to me until I found a solution. I started asking around friends of friends within the art world and got in touch with a few galleries, but none of them were too eager to take on a full exhibition with Isabel's works. Finally, I found a decent gallery, a few miles from our home, that agreed to display Isabel's works. They charged an exorbitant amount, and I was quite nervous to pay such a large sum of money. Isabel, on the other hand, was ecstatic at the idea of a gallery exhibition and begged me to pay them. In hindsight, I was wrong to indulge in her every whim and fancy despite my better judgment, but I wouldn't realize that until it was too late. I paid the gallery an expensive non-refundable deposit, and Isabel started gearing up for her moment in the spotlight. She locked herself away in the art studio working on her paintings, and I made sure not to disturb her. However, things eventually came crashing down. The night before the exhibition, Isabel didn't return to bed past midnight. I woke up to loud crashes and screaming. I rushed towards the art room and saw Isabel angrily tossing her canvases on the floor and wrecking the room. "Isabel, what are you doing? What's the matter?" "It's these stupid canvases. They are terrible. The paint is terrible, and the brushes are of pathetic quality." It took me a lot of time to calm her down, but when I finally did, Isabel posed a gut-wrenching question to me. "I'm tired, Peter. I don't want to do this. It's boring. Can you cancel exhibition, please?" "But honey, I've paid the gallery. It's non-refundable. All your friends and family are going to be there to support you, so why cancel it? You can do this." "No, I can't." "Oh, you never listen to me. Just cancel it. I'm tired and I'm going to bed." I was frustrated, mainly at Isabel's refusal to listen, in addition to the financial repercussions of the gallery, the art room, all of it. With a heavy heart, I canceled the exhibition the same night, and since Isabel didn't want to speak to anyone, I texted each one of her friends personally to let them know about the cancellation. I was up until 4 in the morning, exhausted and angered. The next few days, Isabel refused to have a conversation about everything that had happened, brushing off her painting hobby as if it were nothing. She disposed of all the expensive supplies and cleaned up the art room, stating that it was pretty useless now. She even began hosting parties at her family estate again to take her mind off the whole gallery disaster. I started to miss my job at the firm and wondered if it had to do with all the exhaustion from the painting fiasco. But another jolt would arrive just a week later. Isabel approached me one afternoon with a photography magazine. "Peter, look, my friend Ruby's photographs have been published." The photographs were indeed remarkable, but I was completely unprepared for Isabel's next words. "Look at these gorgeous photos. I've decided, Peter. I want to be like Ruby. I want to be a photographer." I felt uneasy since the painting debacle was recent, but Isabel remained insistent about trying photography. She hounded me about it for weeks. When I politely mentioned the painting incident, she exploded and blamed me for putting her down and squashing her ambitions. And in a highly regrettable decision, I gave in her to demands. We visited a store downtown and I purchased a high-end DSLR camera for Isabel. I considered yet another tutor for her, but I figured there were plenty of online tutorials to familiarize her with photography. In fact, Isabel's friend, Ruby, coached herself from scratch via online videos, so I didn't see why Isabel couldn't do the same. Isabel started venturing outside and took photographs, but none were too remarkable. She begged me to convert the art room into a photography studio for her, and even though I was reluctant, I agreed anyway. I was genuinely happy she'd found a hobby she was thrilled with, but the real trouble began soon after. Isabel and I were having dinner when she suddenly said, "You know, Peter the First had been thinking, I want to do something big." "Okay, honey, what's on your mind?" Ruby had this gorgeous photography display at her house. "I was thinking we could do something like that. Call all the big shots in the photography game and wow them with my talent. This could be my big break." It felt like the painting hobby all over again. I was aware Isabel wasn't the best at painting or photography, but she was completely disillusioned with the reality of her talents. As her spouse, I always wanted to support her through thick and thin, but Isabel refused to be realistic. As the days went by, her insistence on a photography display became overwhelming, and there came a point where I couldn't dodge her requests any longer. Part of me struggled to tell her the truth straight up, but turns out I didn't have to. One afternoon, Isabel had gone out for lunch with her friends while I was at home. An hour later, Isabel returned home furiously and burst into our bedroom. Her face was red from crying. I sprang into action and calmed Isabel down, consoling her and making sure she was all right. "Honey, just calmly tell me what happened." "Peter, I feel horrible. This morning I decided to send a few of my photographs to Ruby to see what she thought of them. She just told me good job, they're decent. But when I used Sharon's phone at lunch today since mine had died, I saw Ruby's text to her. Ruby wrote about how terrible my photos were and that I completely lacked talent. The whole situation was shocking. Isabel may not have been the greatest photographer, and I'd been meaning to have a serious conversation with her. But for her to see such harsh words directly from Ruby, that too behind her back, was truly the last straw. I contemplated what to say at the moment, but little did I know my words would backfire spectacularly. "Listen, honey, I'm really sorry. I know Ruby was a close friend, but you need to stop paying attention to these people, okay? If this is a hobby you love, the opinions of others should never get you down." I'd hoped my words would comfort her, but they only angered Isabel further. "So, you're saying it's just a hobby? I'm not professionally good enough? Fine." She rushed to her drawer, pulled out her DSLR camera, and in an outrageous move, smashed the camera to pieces on the floor. I took a moment to recover from the gravity of what had just occurred. My mind went numb as I wondered how Isabel had casually smashed a $600 camera onto the floor. Everything after that moment was a bit of a blur. I remember there was quite a lot of screaming and shouting, but Isabel refused to see my perspective and acknowledge the reality of her fleeting hobbies. The next few weeks were the hardest. Isabel remained frustrated with me, and each time I tried to apologize and console her, she'd just brush me off, stating that her parents would have supported her more than I did. I was heartbroken and baffled by these statements from her. How could Isabel bring her parents into the conversation to emotionally guilt me? Things continued to be cold between the two of us for a while. But a few months later, everything changed. I had considerable savings in the bank, but it wasn't unlimited money. The reckless spending on the art room, photography studio, and the camera, albeit all my fault for indulging Isabel, were significant expenses. I was hesitant to return to the firm, as all my time with Isabel would be lost again, and I was afraid of what that might mean in light of our recent challenges. Instead of full-time work, I started taking up consultations, either in person or over the phone. That way, I could stay out of the house and be busy for a while, but still make time for Isabel. When I shared the news with her, her reaction was lukewarm at best. Perhaps this is where she first started to lose interest. I carried out consultations for a week and found it convenient to strike a balance between work and spending time with my wife. However, an unexpected tragedy struck me when I was driving back home after a consultation. Unfortunately, I'd been speaking on the phone to a potential client and was distracted. That's why I never noticed the truck that unexpectedly smashed into my car from another lane. It all happened faster than I could process it. I just remember blood, screaming, and glass all around me. I was rushed to the hospital, where Isabel arrived as soon as she found out. Turns out I'd broken a couple of bones and sustained multiple other injuries. The doctors recommended around 2 weeks of hospitalization followed by 6 weeks of physical recovery. I felt trapped. It was as though I'd been suddenly confined to a single place without escape. Isabel remained with me for the first 2 days, after which my parents arrived on the third day while the doctors treated my fractured bones. As Isabel and I spent some time alone, apart from my parents and the doctors, I had this feeling as though she was hiding something from me. I couldn't pinpoint what it was exactly, but she seemed almost disappointed to spend so much time with me in the hospital. One afternoon, I finally asked her, "Isabel, I've been meaning to ask you. Is everything all right? You seem distant. Is there something you want to tell me?" "Peter, to be honest, yes, something has happened. You know I liked writing in my spare time?" "Yes, I remember it, honey. That was so long ago. Have you started writing again?" "So one of my friends, Susan, she got me." Isabel struggled to confess what she wanted to say. "What, honey? What did Susan do?" "She got me a copywriting job at a fashion magazine, and I don't know, I've been sitting here for days, skipping work and tending to you. I just feel so confused. I feel like going back to the office, Peter. I'm tired of sitting here all day. I don't want to." Her words felt like a dagger straight to my heart. Some part of me wrestled with the selfishness of her actions. I wondered, was she truly being selfish or was she indeed feeling trapped? I eventually realized I couldn't force her to throw her life away while I remained chained to a hospital bed for 6 weeks. After her brushes with photography and painting, it finally appeared that she'd found a significant interest in writing. The very fact that her friends saw her talent and helped her secure a working position made me confident and proud of Isabel. Despite our rocky challenges, I was glad to see her finally flourish and find her calling. I decided I didn't want to crush her ambitions and trap her till the time I recovered. "I understand, honey. I've got the doctors here and my parents too. You can keep dropping by, but the fact that you've got such a great job on your own. I'm so proud of you, Isabel. I love you." I never wanted to be the person to tie down my partner to an unhappy life. Looking back at everything, however, I feel stupid for supporting Isabel so endlessly. Nothing could have remotely prepared me for what was to come. As my parents and doctors looked after me during my recovery, Isabel's visits started to lessen. It turned from 1 visit per day to twice a week. I understood Isabel was occupied with her job, but I missed her presence and was undeniably lonely. She neither responded to any of my text messages or phone calls. Her visits soon became limited to only once a week. She would arrive late and always rush off in a hurry to be somewhere for a work commitment. On her rare visits, I mentioned to Isabel that she'd ignored my phone calls and messages, but she came up with a work excuse each time to deflect my questions. I held my tongue after a while and didn't wish to annoy her. I wondered if this was how she felt when I was away at the firm all day long in our first year of marriage. But I couldn't have been more oblivious to the reality of Isabel's constant absence. Another warning sign should have been Isabel's strange requests for money. She'd call me to transfer big amounts to her, stating bizarre reasons for her funds. She'd tell me that her money was tied up in some offshore accounts, property, etc. It was always one vague reason after another. I foolishly didn't question her demands and transferred the money to her. Perhaps the clearest warning sign of it all occurred during my final week of recovery. Isabel was in the hospital room with me on one of her weekly visits. She was strangely nervous for some reason and was constantly on her phone. "Hey, is everything okay, honey? Is somebody calling you?" "No, I'm all good, Peter. Listen, I'm just going to use the bathroom. I'll be right back." As Isabel walked out of the room, I patiently waited for her. However, a few minutes later, a strange man entered my room. He was holding a small bouquet. I was confused as to who he was. "Do I know you?" "Hey, I'm Nathan. Have you seen Isabel? She's just gone to the bathroom." "Who are you? How do you know her?" "I just wanted to talk to her." "Well, what's it about?" "I'm her husband, Peter." Nathan suddenly froze. He started mumbling something under his breath. I'll see you later." Before I could understand what was happening, he hurried out of the room and disappeared. Isabel returned moments later. I confronted her about the man. "Isabel, there was someone here to see you. He said his name was Nathan. Does that ring a bell?" Isabel was hesitant but switched gears in a split second. "Yeah, I know Nathan. He's a good friend. We worked together at the magazine." "But what's the deal between you two? He was carrying flowers and asked for you." He's actually here visiting his mother. She's just down the hall. Anyway, I've got to rush now, honey. I'll see you later." The events of this visit only further fueled my internal conflict and raised more questions than ever before. Honestly, I was too naive. As the end of the week drew closer, I was overjoyed about the date of my discharge. It was my third marriage anniversary with Isabel. Despite our troubles, I planned to surprise her with a beautiful candlelit dinner. I realized we'd been through a lot in recent months, and I hoped to rekindle our flame again. I wanted us to start anew and begin a fresh chapter. Unfortunately, the day couldn't have been a bigger disaster. I was discharged in the afternoon, and my parents dropped me back to my place before returning to their town. Isabel couldn't make it to the hospital as she was tied up with work. I was disappointed to not receive a single text or call from her throughout the day, but I decided to go ahead with the surprise anyway. I spent hours cooking in the kitchen and decorating the house to create the perfect romantic atmosphere. Isabel finally texted me saying that she'd be home by 9 p.m. I eagerly prepared everything for her arrival, and by 8:30 p.m., everything was set. But I had no idea this would be the most painful wait of my life. Time went by and I waited and waited, my patience being tested with each passing minute. 9 p.m. turned to 10, which eventually turned to 11. I called Isabel almost 20 times, but there was no answer. I was afraid something might have happened and started contacting her friends, but unfortunately they didn't have a clue either. As I sat on my couch tossing and turning my head, I received an unexpected call from Joel, an old friend of mine. He used to work with me at the firm, but I couldn't imagine why he was calling me this late at night. "Hey Peter, how have you been?" "I've been great, Joel. How about you?" "Oh, I'm swell. Listen, the reason I'm calling is Isabel's car with you right now?" "No, she's probably driving it. She's not at home right now." "What's the matter?" "Oh, that's funny because I think her car's parked on the street opposite my place. Is Isabel visiting someone?" Not that I know of. I'm waiting for her at home." "Are you sure it's her car?" "Oh yeah, I'm positive. It's the black Volvo, isn't it? The exact same one you drove at the firm a couple of times. It's even got that little dent on it, which I remember." I was anxious like never before. What was Isabel doing in a random neighborhood this late at night? She'd not contacted me the entire day. I hired a cab and rushed to Joel's neighborhood. I kept trying Isabel's number, but to no avail. As I reached the neighborhood, I saw the Volvo. It was unmistakably Isabel's car. Joel was waiting for me out on his front lawn. "Thanks, Joel. You're a lifesaver. It's her car for sure. Happy to help." "Who's the neighbor, by the way?" "I haven't spoken much to him. Some guy called Nathan. Seems like a decent chap. Does Isabel know him?" My heart sank and everything Joel uttered after that felt like background noise. Nathan. I should have known right at the hospital. It was all suddenly clear to me. The flowers, Isabel's nervousness, it all made sense now. I stormed towards Nathan's front door. It was a massive house. Joel asked if he could accompany me, but I asked him to stay back. I wasn't sure what I was about to discover, but I knew it would be ugly. Turns out, I was right on the money. I rang Nathan's doorbell and waited patiently. I heard some loud and angry whispering inside, followed by footsteps. Finally, Nathan opened the door with a warm smile. His face dropped the second he recognized who I was. The moment itself was a blur, but I vividly remember Isabel sitting in Nathan's living room, dressed in nothing but lingerie. "Isabel. What the? How could you?" Isabel stood up immediately with tears in her eyes. "Peter, please, I can explain." Nothing could compare to the sheer heartbreak I felt at that moment. I failed to see how any explanation could ever justify this. It was this gut-wrenching and miserable feeling that my suspicion had been true all along. My eyes lingered on Isabel, but I no longer recognized who this woman was anymore. It felt like she was a stranger. Without a word, stormed out of Nathan's house. Joel saw me and tried to stop me, but I brushed him off. I rushed home and sat on the couch, my mind and heart battling endless thoughts and emotions. How could Isabel have done this? On the day of our anniversary, on the day of my discharge. An hour later, Isabel returned home. She sat across me silently. I couldn't even meet her eye for a few minutes, contemplating my next words. It was only when she started to speak that I let it all out. "Peter, just hear me out." "What do you want me to hear, Isabel? How can you possibly defend what you did? I've supported you through every single thing throughout our marriage, and right when I was in the damn hospital, you chose to sleep with somebody else. You visited me while I was recovering on a bed and then went and got intimate with your coworker. I always knew you were selfish and cruel deep down, but you proved it today, and how? I never thought I'd be uttering these words to Isabel, but I suppose years of pent-up frustration had culminated in this explosive moment. But I never anticipated Isabel's reply. What she said next simply pierced my heart. "How dare you accuse me of being selfish? Do you have any idea what it was to be married to a loser like you? I was bored out of my mind. I didn't have a choice. I was trapped in a miserable life with you, and I became nothing but a loser's wife. Nathan's a million times smarter, charismatic, and more charming than you ever were. He's so rich, he gives me anything I want. He's more man than you'll ever be, Peter. You're nothing. I'd rather be with someone like that than spend the rest of my life with you. Can't stand a minute in this poor hellhole with someone as cheap as you." My mind went numb. It felt like my heart had been ripped apart. Isabel and I sat in silence, reflecting on the cruel words exchanged tonight, but it was clear that there was no coming back from this. Isabel packed all her things and left that day. She told me that she'd be permanently living with Nathan and didn't want to see me again. I grappled with the sheer magnitude of emotions for a few days, processing the events of Isabel's infidelity. A week later, I decided I no longer had any use for such a lavish home anymore and sold it. Isabel had already been asking me for large sums of money from the hospital, and it broke my heart to think it was all spent on Nathan. Regardless, I wasn't interested in spending so exorbitantly anymore, and I decided to move away to my parents' town and live with them for some time. I didn't know how long I'd be there or what I'd do there, away from my law career, but I needed some time to myself. I needed a fresh start. I made sure all of Isabel's furniture was sent over to her estate, while most of mine was kept in a storage locker. I moved to my parents' home with what little I had, hoping to find a sense of peace and calm. What I never expected to receive there was a satisfying deliverance of justice too. I settled into my parents' home and remained there for a couple of months. I had a few childhood friends still around in town, and one of them got me a consultation job at the local law firm. I was determined to rebuild my life, even if it meant taking it one step at a time. It felt comfortable to be back among my childhood home and friends. I'd spent so much of my life in the big city and devoted everything to Isabel, only to be crushed completely. It felt therapeutic to be back in town, reconnecting with friends and family again. After Isabel, my parents became the anchor I desperately needed. I was honestly blessed, but the best was yet to come. One afternoon, I was at the law firm finishing up some paperwork when a stunning woman walked into my office. "Is this Mr. Peters' office?" "My name's Zoe. I have an appointment." "That would be me, yes. Come in." Zoe closed the door and sat across me. I had no clue this would be the most hilariously satisfying encounter of my life. "So, what legal advice can I offer you today?" "Actually, I'm not here for any advice." "I don't understand." "What are you here for then?" "I think you've met my husband before." "Who would that be?" "His name's Nathan." I instantly froze. The events of that night came surging back to my mind. The very fact that Nathan was married too disgusted me. It was strange sitting across Zoe, knowing that the two of us shared the pain of a broken marriage. But aside from the obvious, Zoe had come bearing the most unpredictable piece of news. "I'm sorry to hear about everything. I had no idea Nathan was married." "Oh, don't be. Our marriage was as good as over. But apart from the cheating incident that we're both aware of, there's actually something else. It's why I left Nathan for good." "What is it?" "You see, Nathan isn't who he claims to be. You might think big house, rich lifestyle, it's too good to be true, right? I mean, that's why my wife was attracted to him." "Yeah, about that. I heard you gave a lot of money to your wife recently. Did you ever wonder why?" I shook my head. I had no idea where Zoe was going with this. All I knew was that I was about to be surprised for good. "It's because she gave all her inheritance money to Nathan, who promised her he'd invest it. That's why she kept asking you for extra money. But the thing is, Nathan's a scam artist. He got your wife's entire inheritance money stuck in a shady deal, and he was arrested yesterday. The money's all gone. I had to track you down to tell you this in person." It took me a minute to digest what I'd just heard, and I couldn't help but burst out laughing. Zoe was surprised by my reaction and smiled. "Well, I'm glad I let you know. Take care, Peter." As Zoe left my office, I couldn't stop laughing and smiling at my fate. All of Isabel's bitter words that night had blown back on her face. I did feel slightly sorry for her, but couldn't help thinking about the hilarious irony of the situation. Life's karmic justice was truly unmatched. And for a moment again, I felt truly satisfied.